بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم تسليم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. We continue our journey in the beautiful aphorisms of Sidi Ibn Aṭā'iyya Secondary. May Allah Ta'ala be pleased with him and benefit us through him. And we've now reached number 19. And number 19 is similar to a couple of the other aphorisms that have come before, and that it at the same time expands some of those same meanings that we've already heard. So we will first read it with its translation, and then inshallah ta'ala point out the other two aphorisms that it relates to, and then get into our normal tartib of commentary. So this aphorism states, لا تطلب منه أن يخرجك من حالة ليستعملك فيما سواها فلو أرادك لاستعملك من غير إخراج. So this translates as, do not request him to get you out of a state to make use of you in a different one. Or, were he to desire so, he could make use of you as you are without taking you out. So this is similar in some senses to the second aphorism, which was where he talked about the desire for us to be in a state of tajreed, which is translated by Victor Danner as isolation, but really from the means of subsistence. And that how, if Allah Ta'ala has placed you within the means, that you have a job, that you have to take care of people, for you want to leave the means, it is that a sign that there's a subtle desire there. Whereas if Allah Ta'ala has placed you in a state of tajreed, where that you are in isolation, or you could say that Allah Ta'ala has freed you up from the means of subsistence, then for you to come down and to descend from that is descending from a lofty aspiration. So you can see how it kind of relates to that, because you could sum up that aphorism, i.e. number 2, as being content with where Allah has placed us. So this is similar in this vein, but that one specifically is addressing these states of tajreed and that being in the asbab, the means of subsistence, or being free of that. Whereas this is more general. This relates to all of the different states, every hala. That one mentions one in specifically. And also the 17th aphorism, which we took a couple weeks ago, ما ترك من الجهل شيء من أراد أن يحدث في الوقت غير ما أظهره الله فيه. And that he who wishes that at a given moment there appear other than what Allah has manifested in it has left no ignorance behind at all. So it relates in the sense that we are taught the adab and the etiquette, knowing that Allah Ta'ala sees us, being in the presence of Allah, to only do what we're supposed to do in the moment, and to live in that moment, and to submit internally to where Allah Ta'ala has placed us in that moment and respond accordingly. And so it relates to that, and in that aphorism, of course, he's speaking in the context of knowledge, but here he is speaking in the context of knowledge, but also supplication, and that all other states that we find ourselves in. So, do not request him to get you out of a state, to make use of you in a different one. For were he to desire so, he could make use of you as you are, without taking you out. So let's begin with what is taken as a given. It is a given that the state that he's referring to, this hala, is not a state that is blameworthy according to the sacred law. I.e., you're not in a state of sin. You're not doing something that was prohibited. If someone is in such a state, you have to do whatever it is that you can do to get out of that state. And so when he says, لا تطلب, do not request, do not ask, do not supplicate, if you're in a state of disobedience, should surely supplicate Allah, and that with all of that your spiritual aspiration to get you out of that state, and do everything that you can immediately to be in a better state. and to repent and to turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that doesn't relate to a state of sin or in a state where you're doing something that is prohibited. And the proof that it's permissible to ask this is in the Quran in Surah An-Nisa. Allah Ta'ala says that رَبَّنَا أَخْرِجْنَا مِنْ هَذِهِ الْقَرْيَةِ الظَّالِمِ أَهْلُهَا, that Lord, rescue us from this town whose people are oppressors. And this relates to the companions that were unable to make the migration from Mecca and Mukarramah to Medina and Munawwara because of the disbelievers who prevented them, and that they didn't have the means or the wherewithal or the strength or the relationships to make the migration. And so they made this dua, رَبَّنَا أَخْرِجْنَا مِنْ هَذِهِ الْقَرْيَةِ الظَّالِمِ أَهْلُهَا, rescue us from this town whose people are oppressors. Now, of course, they're submitting to Allah Ta'ala in terms of where He's placed them. But it's permissible to ask for them. That's a good thing. So in addition to their submission and seeing everything being from Allah, they also know that Allah wants them to be out of that situation, so they ask Allah. So this is not what He's referring to. That's something that is permissible. And in fact, the commentators say that Allah Ta'ala answered their supplication. And that some of them say is that it meant that they actually eventually made the migration, and that some of them actually stayed until Fath Mecca, till the conquest of Mecca, when they were then able to be in a better situation. So this is what it doesn't refer to. So we have to discuss that first, because someone might say that I'm in this state, and conflate that pseudo-spirituality with true spirituality. And what we want is real, true, authentic spirituality. Speaking about that with someone, and that false or pseudo-spirituality is that cerebral type spirituality where you know what it is that you should do, and in some affairs you're willing to do it. But then where it really counts, it remains in your brain, and you don't have the ability to put it into practice. And at the level of community, that means just simply getting along and smoothing over the relationships that go sour, and that at the level of that working together for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there are implications there that are of the utmost importance. In true, authentic, real spirituality, it really means that you're able to do those things that are hard upon the nafs to do, not the things that it's easy just to give lip service to. And in the end, is that there's different degrees that people have, and some people are willing to sacrifice more than others, and others are willing to take themselves to account and struggle with themselves more than others. So as for the linguistic breakdown, there's only a couple words we're really going to look at. So here, la tatlub, talab here means to ask or to request, or it could also mean to seek, but here it's to ask. A talab is like a request, a dua, in other words, a supplication. And then the hala here, it's your hal, it's your state, wherever Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala has placed you. So whether you are respected or whether you don't have a lot of respect in society, whether you are wealthy or whether you are poor, whether you are earning a living, whether you have a lot of free time on your hands, and so forth and so on. So it relates to your state outwardly, just as it relates to your state inwardly. It relates to your worldly state, just as it relates to your religious state. So all of those dimensions are included in this word here, hala. And then the etiquette that he's teaching us with how to respond to our particular situation. And even though we're only taking one aphorism per session, and it would be nice to take a little bit more and to go into a little bit less detail in some ways so that we could get through more. However, these aphorisms are so rich, it really is hard to shortchange them because there's so many different meanings. And you want to try to cover them as best as possible. And really, if you're trying to keep the session to a reasonable amount of time, it's hard to take more than one. But it's not enough just to study this book one time. So all this time that we're investing in it It really is just the beginning. We have to study it multiple times. And really that because this is like the constitution of the awliya, right? This is like the manual of the awliya. It's something that we have to come back to time and time again. And the good thing is, after you go into that a little bit of in depth, one of the things that I would recommend for those watching online or those who are in person is to write your own summary of the meaning of the aphorism. So that if you needed to summarize it in 2 to 3 lines, do it in English, and you can keep some of the Arabic words if you don't know the translation of them. That's fine, as long as you know what they mean. Try to summarize them in your own words. And you can take notes during the session, or you could follow up after it if you have time to do so. But it's very helpful because one of the things that you can do is to read these aphorisms like a wird, and just try to read through all of them on a regular basis. Remind yourself of them. This is very important because these meanings, in the moment when you're in class, that you might have an understanding, it might make sense, you might be inspired to act upon them. And then by nightfall, let alone tomorrow, the next day, let alone 2 or 3 days later, it kind of just like fades away. And then alhamdulillah, you come back to class again, and then you're reminded a second time and so forth. But these are precious jewels. These are jewels. If we can even start the process of implementing some of them partially, it is the path to wilayah and beyond, into higher degrees of wilayah and sainthood. And these are some of the most precious etiquettes of all that are in the hearts of the elect, of the chosen servants of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. And it's a blessing just to love them, even if we have no portion in putting them into practice. Just to love them and to know that they exist, and love the people who've implemented them and have realized them within themselves. That's a blessing in of itself. Let alone to try to do something, to do our part, to do what it is that we can. So let's look at some of the meanings here. So, لا تطلب منه أن يخرجك من حالة ليستعملك فيما سواها. So, لا تطلب منه, do not request of him, do not ask for Allah to أن يخرجك. أخرج يخرج is to take you out of in this case, hala, and to put you into another. Or to remove you from one state and to put you in another. And the word that he uses here is liyasta'milak. So ista'mala yasta'milu literally means to use. Right? It could also be translated like to occupy you with another. So what he's really teaching us here is the adab of Aqim haythu aqamak Allah. You could summarize this aphorism as remain where Allah has put you. Remain where Allah has put you. What does that mean? This is the third of what they call the adab of the arifin, the great etiquettes of the knowers of Allah, is to suffice ourselves with the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And He has comprehensive, that complete knowledge of everything. He's all-knowing subhanahu wa ta'ala. And to know that there is a divine wisdom in every situation, in circumstance, in state He has placed us in. So, when we see it as being from Allah, from that standpoint, they say, فَلَا نَسْتَحْقِرُهَا. We're not supposed to look down upon that state. Inwardly now. We're supposed to accept it. So again, outwardly, if it's something to do with wrong or something to do with justice, that's not what we're talking about here. Inwardly, even if it's something that's distasteful to us, if we see it as being from Allah, we'll see that there is a divine wisdom in it, and we might come to know what that is, and we might not. But we believe that there's a divine wisdom in it, and it requires us to submit to where Allah Ta'ala has placed us. So then they go in, they mention all of these different examples. So that if someone is singled and not married, then they don't desire to get married. And if they are married, that they don't desire to get divorced. And if they are poor, they don't desire to be rich. And if they are rich, they don't desire to be poor. And if they are healthy, they don't desire to be sick. And if they are sick, they don't desire to be healthy. And if they are respected, they don't desire to be that people have a lack of respect for them. And if people are showing a lack of respect to them, they don't desire to be respected. And if they're in a state of constriction, they don't desire to be in a state of expansion. And if they're in a state of expansion, they don't desire to be in a state of constriction. And that if they have strength of some sort, they don't desire to be weak. And if they're weak, they don't desire strength. And if they are at home, not traveling, they don't desire to travel. And if they're traveling, they don't desire to be at home. Now, it doesn't mean like if someone's not married that they don't seek to get married. It doesn't mean that if someone's sick that they don't go to a doctor that cure their sickness. So let's not misunderstand where he's going with this. But there's an acceptance at the basic level where we're at. And then you can take the means for some good outwardly, but as an abd of Allah that is submitted, not as someone who's discontent with where they've been placed. And it might be that Allah take you out of that state, and that single person gets married, or that married person gets divorced. But what he's saying here is that it's not something we're actively seeking in general. And of course, there are exceptions to all of these different things. So there's certain things that all of that doesn't mean. So let's not misunderstand. Let's open our hearts, try to get at let's try to really understand what he's trying to get at. And the spiritual path gets very fine-tuned, and it's extremely subtle. And there might be a correct meaning that we could very easily misunderstand and be misguided as a result, but no, the correct understanding is just right there in the middle between two other extremes that are extremely subtle. So he's primarily referring to now us being in that state, how we respond to Allah. I hope that's clear. Okay? And what he says here then is, we should see the states that we've been placed in, that Allah has placed us in those states. And we should see ourselves, وَلِلَّهِ الْمَثَلِ الْأَعْلَى, like someone who's deceased in the hands of someone who's washing them, and that in no anthropomorphic way. Or they say like a pen that just does what the fingers tell it to do in terms of what it's supposed to write. In other words, it's complete and total submission. Complete and total submission. But this is liberating. This is the way that the people of Allah are. It's not easy. We talk about wilaya, and just think about in the dunya how hard it is to be a master of anything, to really excel and to be a top-tier athlete, to really excel and to be a CEO of a company, to really excel and to be one of the billionaires on earth, or to reach, and I'm not saying we should seek these things or not seek these things, but to reach a high political position. Very few people reach that. Very few people become professors at Harvard. So it's a small percentage. Likewise, when you talk about the higher tiers and degrees of closest to Allah, these things aren't easily attained. There's a price that we have to pay. And it sounds good, and it should sound good. That's a sign of Iman, that we think about that we want it. But we have to be willing to pay the price. And so if we want to be an Arif Billah, this is something we have to do, is just completely and totally submit. Completely and totally submit. But then the amazing thing is, this is what's in our own benefit. So when we submit to the state that we're in, it is in our own benefit in three ways. And this is why that we've been commanded to be like this. So this is the beautiful thing. Allah could have made being religious very difficult for the human being and distasteful in all of its manifestations. Yes, in general, حُفَّتِ الْجَنَّةُ بِالْمَكَارِهِ وَحُفَّتِ النَّارُ بِالشَّهَوَاتِ. We know the hadith that paradise is surrounded by distasteful things, whereas that the hellfire is surrounded by desires. But once you struggle with yourself a little bit, obedience becomes that fulfilling. It becomes pleasurable. It becomes sweet. That reading and studying and remembering Allah becomes sweet. That being patient helps you go through the tribulation, psychologically, emotionally, and so forth and so on. So Allah has made the deen, because it is the deen of fitrah, what we're supposed to is and align with the best possible way for us to feel, the best way that we should feel while we're here in this world. So this is but he could have made it the opposite. He could have made that you have to worship Allah and is distasteful always until you meet Him. But He didn't, from His mercy. So there's 3 reasons that they mention. Is it so that you could have raha from taslim? Raha is repose, internal relaxation by submission. Meaning, you save yourself trouble by submitting. And what happens then when you can submit, this is a very precise statement, فَيَتَرَقَّى بَاطِنُكَ عَنْ بِسَاطِ الضِّيقِ, is that you will ascend from a state of constriction إِلَى بِسَاطِ الْإِنْشِرَاحِ, to a state of expansion. In other words, by submitting to where Allah has placed us, it helps us deal with that particular circumstance in a way that is most pleasing to Him. But if you're fighting that situation, you're fighting where Allah has placed you, there's always going to be turmoil in your heart. There's always going to be dissonance. You're never going to have purity. You're not going to be able to concentrate in your prayers. You're not going to be able to remember Allah with an unperturbed heart. This is in our own benefit. And you can be in a very difficult situation outwardly, but have inshirah, expansion of the heart inwardly. And he says, this is what will assist you to be constant in doing all different acts of good. That's the first reason. So this is in our own benefit to submit. The second is so that we can fulfill the right that Allah Ta'ala has upon His servant, in that He is the one, subhanahu wa ta'ala, that decrees what He wants to decree. Now we have, if we talk about theologically speaking, an ikhtiyar, freedom of choice. We do have freedom of choice. So we're not talking about us choosing right or wrong here. What we're talking about now is exercising our choice in these matters where we've been placed in certain situations without our choice. And again, it has to be something that's permissible, and that it has to be that a situation that we know we don't need to get ourselves out of. And so by leaving what it is that we want, we're able then to do what Allah wants and to be content with what He wants, and that's the very best form of worship of all. So someone who is bedridden out of a sickness and they're content with where Allah has placed them, even though they wish that they could worship, that's a good thing. That's from Iman. That doesn't negate the submission, because they know worship is beloved to Allah, but they can't. They have to worship Allah in their heart by being content with the divine decree. And it very well might be that that's their door that opens up the doors of wilayah to them, and that they get a lot more reward many times over than people who are actively worshiping. It's the best ibadah of all. And the people of Allah, this is how they see this. And it's not a type of ibadah that you can see outwardly. So someone might wonder, like, how could that person be special? How could that person be a great awliya? He's not flying through the air. He's not wearing a turban that's wrapped 10 times around the head. That, he doesn't even really look like he has a lot of nur in his face. He looks very normal. He laughs like I laugh. I just see him eating like normal people. And he could be from the kibar of the awliya. Because it's not about your outward. It's about what's here. And of course, you're supposed to also do the outward things. And we know that about Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq. He wasn't preferred over other people, not from an excessive amount of prayers that he did, and he used to pray a lot, not because of a lot of fasting, and he used to fast a lot, but because of something waqara fi qalbih. There was something special that he had in his heart. And they say that that could be the secret of just knowledge of Allah that he was gifted, or love that he had for the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they go hand in hand. The more love you have for the Rasul, the more that the doors of the knowledge of Allah will open up for you. So this is the second thing, is that by being content with where Allah Ta'ala has placed us, then we will learn how to give up what we want for what Allah wants. And then the third thing is, so that we don't seek something that we think is better for us, but it turns out that it's actually worse for us. So we might think, oh, because I'm sick, if I only had good health, then I could set on a path to Allah. What did we take last week? You're putting off works until you find spare time is one of the frivolities of the self. You might not ever be in a state where you have well-being again. Allahu A'lam. That could happen to anyone at any moment. May Allah protect us. So do what you can now. Worship now. And for you to think that you're just going to be freed up, healthy, and then do your thing. If you're not doing what you could do in the moment, when you have good health, you're much more likely to be driven by desire than to be driven by your heart and to do what you actually wanted to do. So if you seek something that other than the state that you're in, and you're given that very thing, and it's not accompanied by afiyah, by well-being, you might be in a more difficult state than you were before. You might think, I just need this job. I just need to move to this area. I just need to get out of this relationship. I just need to do something, do this, do that. Something other than where you've been placed. And you think that once that happens, this is what's going to happen. How do you know? That's your wahm. That's your fanciful imagination. And it might be true. Wahm doesn't mean it's not possible. Right? Wahm is just a high degree of improbability. So shak is 50-50. Probability is 51 to 99. Certainty is 100. Improbability is 1 to 49. So there's degrees. That 44 is not like 33, is not like 22. That wahm is a low degree of probability that actually be the case. And here, this is what it means. So you might, in the nature of the nafs is, if it's working, it just doesn't want to work. And it might think that, oh, I just need to stop working so that I can free myself up for worship. I can attend all those mawlids that they're having in Rabi al-Awwal. I could do this, I could do that. And were you to free yourself up, it actually might be worse for you than were you to just have a job. And there's all kinds of things that we don't even know about ourselves, that when we're in certain situations, subhanAllah, and this is deep, this is hard, and we're confronting something now that is very, very deep. And we have to sit down and think about where Allah has placed us. Think about the things that repeat in your lives, the different personality types, the different people that you interact with, your family situation, how you're raised, your friends, because things repeat themselves. And you wonder why I have this relationship and that relationship, and the same things keep happening. What's going on? Why are these people attracted to me? And these people don't tend to spend time with me. And these things are healthy, not from the standpoint of complaining, but to come to understand yourself and where Allah Ta'ala has placed you. And so these things are very, very deep, because deep down inside, some of us are seeking fulfillment through worldly things. And people that make mistakes and that get themselves out of a situation that they really shouldn't, it leads to a greater harm. Because they broke away from something they shouldn't have broken away from. And very subtly, it's opposition of the divine decree, and that will never lead to good. Unless that it's situations that we refer to. And it's enough disclaimers. I think we get the point. There's definitely situations where no, you have to get out of that situation. Any type of situation of that abuse of any sort, that's a different situation. Okay? So, this is the third reason that it's best just to remain where Allah Ta'ala has placed us, is because we don't know what's best for us, our own selves. And if we get what we're asking for, it might even be, we might be worse off. It might be even more tiring. It might preoccupy us even more. So, this relates to our worldly affairs, our other worldly affairs, outwardly, things that relate to us, and also inwardly at the level of our heart. And the other really important thing here is we should never think that the situation we're in now, given that it's permissible, can prevent us from drawing near to Allah Ta'ala. This is why this is such a liberating aphorism. So look what he says, and this is the second part of this. That فَلَوْ أَرَادَكَ لَاسْتَعْمَلَكَ مِنْ غَيْرِ إِخْرَاجٍ. That if Allah, that to desire so, He could make use of you as you are without taking you out. In other words, is that He can open the doors for you to draw near to Him where you are. So you don't have to necessarily stop working and to study full-time and to that worship full-time. No. He can give you what you're seeking. Because ultimately, it's not about just that worship or that full-time study. Everything is a means ultimately to get near to Allah. The only thing that we seek in and of itself is ma'rifah of Allah, knowledge of Allah. Everything else that we do is a means. Knowledge, worship, character, all of the other things that we do is a means. All of our relationships, that how you are with your husband, how the husband is with the wife, how you are with your children, how you are with your friends, with all other people. Ultimately about getting close to Allah. That's the whole point. And so you think that you need to do A, B, and C to draw near to Allah. But the point is, Allah can give you everything you're seeking and much more without removing you from where you are. That is incredibly beautiful. Nothing can prevent us from drawing near to Allah except our own selves. Nothing. Unless we let it prevent us. So this is why He's teaching us this adab, because this is bad adab with Allah. For us to put what we want over what Allah wants. What we think, what we need, compared to what Allah knows what we need. He's our creator. He's our creator. And again, this is very deep. This requires a lot of time to process. I don't expect us all just to get it right off the bat. This requires reflection. He's going very, very deep. And as we go deep in this aphorism, a lot's going to come up. And there's going to be a lot of questions. And even people that might be a little bit embarrassed to ask them, I guarantee you, a lot of people have questions about what it means or what it doesn't mean. And that's fine, that's good. And we can find time, inshallah ta'ala, to walk through what it means and what it doesn't mean. So it's said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to the Prophet David, Dawood alayhi salam, Ya Dawood, O Dawood, turid wa urid. You want and I want. Wala yakun illa ma urid. Only thing that is going to happen is what I want. And sallamt li ma urid. If you submit to me in relation to what I want, ataytuka bima turid. I will give you what you want. Wa lam tusallim li. If you don't submit to me, ma urid, what I want, at'abtuka fima turid. I will tire you out with what you want. Wala yakun illa ma urid. And the only thing that is going to happen is what I want. So Allah wants and we want. And if we don't submit to Allah, the only thing that's going to happen is what Allah wants. But if we submit to what Allah wants, we'll get everything that we want and more. And that one of the shuyukh said when one of his companions asked him about the haqiqat al-wilaya, the true nature of sainthood, being close to Allah. حقيقة الولاية هو, what is it? إذا كان صاحبها جالسا في الظل لا تشتهي نفسه الجلوس في الشمس. If someone is sitting in the shade, they don't desire to sit in the sun. وإذا كان جالسا في الشمس لا تشتهي نفسه الجلوس في الظل. If they're sitting in the sun, that they don't desire to sit in the shade. And he clarifies, هذا كل ما الاختيار دون الأمر الضروري. So it doesn't mean that if you're about to faint because you're going to get sunstroke that I'm just going to sit here in the sun. It doesn't mean that. Much deeper than that. Much deeper than that. You only want to happen in the moment what is meant to happen. But again, this reoccurring theme, Al-Sufi ibn Waqtihi, that the person of Allah is the son of the moment. We're taught to live in the present. Think about all the anguish that will go, all of our worries, everything that we're worried about at our own selves and our children and all these other types of things. We're wasting the moment by letting all of that pollutant spoil our heart. If we just live in the moment, in the true meaning of the word, for Allah, remembering Allah, all of that will go away. It doesn't mean that we're not going to have to deal with it. We might have to deal with it at a later time. But living in the moment is what we want. Now, and so they mention a story as well that is there to kind of warn us and to show what could happen. That if you ask for something and you don't ask for it in the right way, or you ask for it with bad manners, or you don't say fi khayrun lutfun afia, in a state of good and that gentleness and well-being. So, and I remember one of my friends, one time we were visiting the Prophet Hud alayhi salam in Hadramaut, and during this visit he got very sick. And one of our teachers that went to visit him and asked him, he said, have you been asking for big things while you're here? Making like very lofty requests? He said, when you ask for something, say fi khayrun wa lutfun wa afia. Ask for everything, fi khayr wa lutfun wa afia, in a state of goodness, in a state of gentleness, in a state of well-being. Because if you don't, you might get what you're asking for, but you get sick, or it comes in with a very difficult tribulation, or in some other way. But Allah Ta'ala can give you whatever it is that He wants to give you, how He wants to give you it. But we should ask, because when we know our weakness, fi khayru lutfun wa afia. So this particular individual, he said that I wish that I could get out of the means of subsistence, and that just all I needed was 2 loaves of bread a day, and I'll be able to get by. And so that way I can relax myself from the way that the means of subsistence tire me out. So he made this dua, and shortly after that he was imprisoned. And after he was in prison, they used to bring him raghifain, a loaf of bread in the morning, a loaf of bread in the evening. And he's completely freed up. He's locked up. There's nothing preventing him from worshiping. And then this went for a period of time, and that he realized that he asked for this without that asking Allah Ta'ala for him to give it to him in a state of afiyah. And this is what you asked for, this is what you were given. So then he made tawbah and returned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, eventually exited prison. In other words, sometimes we get what we want, but it happens in a way like, no, that's not what I meant. But we have to be very careful in terms of what it is that we ask for. Now, so adab is really what is key here. فَلَوْ أَرَادَكَ لَاسْتَعْمَلَكَ مِنْ غَيْرِ إِخْرَاجٍ. For were he to desire so, he would make use of you as you are without taking you out. So the word here is sta'malaka. It is that using you in a way that is pleasing to him. Okay? So as long as you're doing something that at a baseline is permissible, it could very well be that you just have some type of regular job. But Allah brings great benefit on your hands. And even if he didn't, just you doing that particular thing, if you're doing it for the sake of Allah, it will be a means of you drawing near to Him. And you think that you need to get out of that to draw near to Allah, but no, you drawing near to Allah is in that particular thing. So this is the means of Him using you, making use of you, occupying you, i.e. with a state that is pleasing to Him. This is why we heard our teachers say that in relation to the da'wah, that we be used ala al-wasf al-mahbubiyya and Allah. That the work that we do be a means for us to become beloved to Allah. And that's what we want. And don't think that you have to be a scholar or a student of knowledge, even though those are great things to do, to be, in order for that to happen. You just have a regular job. Other people might not even associate you with being an extremely pious person. It doesn't matter what people think. You want to be used in a way that is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that He can give you what He gives to the elect of those that are completely freed up to worship Him. He could give you that with a regular career, a 9-to-5 job, or whatever else. This is within the realm of possibility. And when someone relies upon Allah only and brings these meanings into their life, this is what ends up happening. And hakala. All the means ultimately point to Allah. And there's an ishara in the Quran where Allah Ta'ala says, and when that to Sayyidina Musa, khudha wa la takhaf. That in relation to Moses' staff turned into a snake, a serpent. And that Allah commanded Moses, khudha wa la takhaf. Take it and do not fear. سَنُعِيدُهَا سِيرَتَهَا الْأُولَى. We will return it back to how it was initially. So the staff represents the means. And by way of miracle, it turned into a snake. And then Allah Ta'ala can turn it back into a staff. In other words, is that the means, nothing ultimately turns people away from Allah. Everything directs you to Allah. Even the means. So if we have the right perspective and we have the right state of heart and the state of being, everything around us will take us to Allah. Everything. Every situation that we're in. Bitter, sweet, difficult, easy, and so forth and so on. Everything ultimately takes us to Allah. And that's what it means to be a knower of Allah. Is that you see the divine impact upon creation and everything reminds you of Allah and you submit to Allah in every single situation that you find yourself in. Very easy to talk about on the tongue. Not so easy to have it realized within one. And even the language that we use when it comes to this. Look at the language that they use, like warid. They call them waridat, which is like a type of inspiration that comes to the heart of the righteous. The word warada yaridu is to come. So it's only when we've completely conquered the soul where it starts to just disappear. The warid is not something, it's not from you, it's coming to you. They call them an arif billah. In other words, there's no ego at this point. There's nothing that relates to the self. At arif billah, which literally means is like that a knower through Allah has nothing to do with your own self. It only comes when you completely conquer the soul in the highest degrees. But we do the very little that we can. So, the point here is that, so if إِذَا أَرَادَكَ, for if Allah intended it for you, that if He desired so, i.e., that if He wanted to make you from those who are beloved to Him and to use you in a way that was beloved to Him and pleasing to Him, He could do so min ghayri ikhraj, without taking you out. He could occupy you without removal. And what it really means here is, one of the meanings is, لا حصل لك المطلوب من غير إخراج. What it is that you are really seeking, He can give to you without taking you out of that state. And what a blessing. What a blessing. And think about the depth of those implications. So then in closing here, some of the commentators mentioned a story that we mentioned in the beginning. And this was the story of that Sidi ibn Aṭā'iyya himself, Secondary, with his Shaykh, the great Imam Abu al-Abbas al-Mursi. And so that, if you remember, that he came into the presence of Abu Abbas al-Mursi, and that Sidi ibn Aṭā'iyya al-Secondary had in his heart that al-azam al-tajreed, he was going to leave the means of subsistence. And that he was saying to himself that there's no way for me to draw near to Allah in the state that I'm in. And I'm just preoccupied with outward knowledge, and I'm mixing with people, and hakala. Right? I'm out among people, I'm doing these various things that preoccupy me. I don't have a lot of time. So he's saying this to himself like, khalas, I'm leaving all of this. I'm going to free myself up just to be with the Shaykh. And he said, without me even asking him, he knew what was in his heart. And then he says, as the shuyukh tend to do, sahabani insan. There was a person who took my companionship and that was preoccupied with outward knowledge. And he was someone that other people were benefiting from, and he's someone that had tasted the sweetness of this path. And that he then said to me that, take me out of the state that I'm in and let me free myself up to be in your companionship. And I said to him that ليس الشأن كذا. It doesn't work like this. ولكن أمكث فيما أنت فيه. Rather, remain where you are. وما قسمه الله لك على أيدينا فهو إليك واصل. And what Allah Ta'ala has decreed that you are going to receive on our hands by means of us, it's going to reach you. Whatever your qism, your portion, what Allah Ta'ala has decreed that He will distribute to you by means of the Shaykh, it's going to reach you. ثم قال الشيخ ونظر إليه وقال. And so he's just telling the story, and obviously he's referring to Sidi ibn Aṭā'iyya al-Secondary and others that are there to take the lesson. And this is the way that the teachers are, and this happens. If you've ever been around the inheritors, this happens regularly. Regularly. Is that they speak to your innermost thoughts. Regularly. And it reaches a point where it happens once, twice, and you're like, oh, he was definitely speaking to me, but like, was anyone else feel that, or was that just me? And then it starts to happen so regular, you just realize, oh, khalas. And then the great shuyukh sometimes will that even be more explicit with these things, but they tend to do it by way of ishara, because these things require adab, and they require manners. So then, as this story goes, Imam Abu Abbas al-Mursi looks at Sayyid bin Aṭā'iyya al-Secondary and he says, هَكَذَا شَأْنُ الصِّدِّقِينَ. This is the way of the highest saints. لا يخرجون عن شيء حتى يكون الحق تعالى هو اللي يتولى إخراجهم. Is that they never that move to a different state until Allah, He Himself, is the one that moves them. Subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so he said, so I left His presence. وَقَالَ غَسَلَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى مِنْ قَلْبِي تِلْقَ الْخَوَاطِرِ. Allah washed away those thoughts from my heart. وَوَجَدْتَ الرَّاحَ بِالتَّسْلِيمِ إِلَى اللَّهِ. And I found that repose in just submitting to Allah. And then he says that, as our Prophet said, هُمُ الْقَوْمِ لَا يَشْقَى بِهِمْ جَلِيسُهُم. As that the people that take the companionship of these people, is that they will never be damned. These are people that uplift people in our means for them to attain the utmost felicity in this world and in the next. And this is the way that the true shuyukh are. And when you understand this, that you understand, you don't even need to be in the Shaykh's presence physically. Sometimes the Shaykh is on the other side of the world. Sometimes the Shaykh doesn't even speak the language that you necessarily speak. And if we understand these meanings, you understand that distance doesn't matter. You understand that a different language doesn't matter. All of these things that we think that we normally need. And of course, different people will find their home, in a sense, and their sustenance with different people. That's the case. And it doesn't mean that we don't try to spend time with our Shaykh. No, you should, to the extent possible, try to spend as much time as you can with your teachers on a regular basis. You should try to at least visit them, even if they're on the other side of the world, once a year if possible. And that do what it is that they want you to do on a regular basis. But don't think that you have to be with them right before them in the place that they are, in the city that they are, in order to truly benefit from them. And I remember our teachers, subhanAllah, there'd be times where, like for instance in the Mawlid season, not all the students go to all the different Mawlids in different places. And the teachers specify, these students go here, these students go there. And sometimes you'll find a student that thinks it's better for him to go to where the Shaykh's going to be when he was told to be somewhere else. And those that know you're going to benefit more not being in the presence of the Shaykh, being where he told you to be, than where you to be right before him. You'll benefit ala kulli hal, but there's more benefit in that. And so if they tell you to remain in a place, even if that place is far from them, and to do things that you think are like preoccupying you for what you really need to be doing, or making you even more distant from where you want to be, that's all our own wahm. That's our own fanciful imagination. The true people of Allah know exactly where to put you and what to advise you, because they have basira, and they're inspired with the directions that it is that they give you, and still you have to do your part. You have to be upright, and you have to do what it is that you can do, but then it will lead to the greatest outcome, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. And again, we should always remember is that ultimately Allah could give us whatever He wants to give us, however He wants to give it, subhanahu wa ta'ala. We should never forget that, and remain that dedicated and do what it is that we can, but we don't rely upon our actions. That was the very first aphorism. We rely upon the bounty of Allah. You do that, and you have a good opinion of your Lord, and you believe that He's going to give you an immense reward, because He is the one deserving of giving, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you don't even need to think about, because of the time which we live. Although, yes, because of the time which we live, that it's likely that Allah Ta'ala gives you an abundant reward because of His difficulty. But go beyond the means even. He could give us as He wants to give us, because He is Allah. And if that grows in our heart, Allahu Akbar, then that we are truly resembling these people of Allah, who Allah gives these great blessings. Subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah Ta'ala open up our hearts and bless us with understanding, and to give us tawfiq in all of our different affairs. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.